Portland Tenants United. We'll get to introductions in a second, but just wanted to say we originally had planned on doing some kind of training or a briefing about eviction defense in light of the moratorium that could have been lifted just recently. Thankfully, it got extended, and so the moratorium on evictions will continue into September, I believe. And so we're here to talk about that, but we also still want to highlight the importance of eviction defense and get ready for that inevitable day that it will come to pass, where the eviction moratorium will be lifted and we will have a wave of evictions, from what we can tell, from people not being able to, afford or pay rent anymore. So, with that, we are PTU. My name is Nathan. I go by he, him pronouns, and we are PTU. We are a tenants union. We're seeing a lot of revolutionary action around the country and around the world in response to most of all the Black liberation movement. And so we're seeing a lot of struggles united behind them. And so likewise, I think it's important to say that we are also in that vein trying to aid and uplift those individuals and organizations that are in that movement, especially Black Lives Matter here in the US. So we are a tenants' rights organization and a union, and we're seeking to enact anti-racist and pro-tenant housing policies and protecting vulnerable people from violent housing practices such as evictions through direct action. So we're very excited to be able to talk to you all tonight about the current state of affairs. And with that, Leo, let's go around and do introductions first. So just everybody who's here, go ahead and say your name and your pronouns, and how you got involved as an organizer. Allie's here, yay! So why don't we go with that? Allie, introduce yourself and give a quick little rundown of how you became or why you're an organizer.
Sure. Great. So yeah, my name's Allie. Use she, her pronouns. I'm a elected member of the organizing committee for Portland Tenants United. I got first involved in tenant organizing when I was in college. When I lived at a really big school where housing was kind of hard to come by, and so there was a lot of really bad landlords. So I, became really familiar with tenant protections, which were very sparse, and really started helping fellow students. And then in 2016, I met some of the organizers with Portland Tenants United and started going to actions, and then got elected as a member of the organizing committee in January of 2019. And primarily, I'm one of the people that kind of just helps tenants with their day-to-day kind of problems with landlords. That's all.
All right, and then I'll just go next on my screen, Lior.
All right, my name is Lior. I'm also an elected member of the organizing committee. I use he, him pronouns. I'm also the chair of the Outreach, Advocacy, and Coalitions Working Group. And which that working group does all sorts of things, but one of the things that we focus on is policy and trying to advance tenant-friendly policy. I became an organizer with PTU for a whole bunch of different reasons, but mostly I kind of fell into PTU, bumped into a bunch of their actions, and saw that they were willing to challenge the messed up status quo in a way that was more direct than a lot of other organizations. And that really appealed to me. I was tired of the slow, only inside game type of actions that were happening with other organizations, and was excited to join forces with a group that felt really ready to challenge what was happening. And that's what we're trying to do now. Thanks.
All right, and then I have sitting next to me Lauren, so I'm just going to do this here.
Hi, Nathan's my roommate, so it's very convenient. So I'm also an elected member of the organizing committee. My name is Lauren, she, hers. And I'm also the chair of the communications working group, and I'm pretty active on Oak. I enjoy doing policy research, and I am also a student, so I do that for my studies as well. I'm originally from Los Angeles, where we've had rent control since 1979. So when I first moved here, I was pretty appalled by the lack of tenant protections here. And that led me to become involved with the Community Alliance of Tenants. And then with PTU, where I was elected to the OC in the beginning of January, along with Ali and Lior. So that's it.
Last but not least, we got Dom.
Hi, so I'm Dom. I use he, him pronouns. And I joined PTU summer of 2017 and got involved with a protest going to Salem, go around the legislation at the time that would have put protections in for no cause evictions, which I cared about because I had been no cause evicted years back when I lived in North Portland. And I've been doing a little bit of everything with PTU since then. Right now I kind of like run the Twitter mostly, and I'm here to talk about how eviction defense in eviction court has looked and what it might look like in the future when the eviction moratorium's up and the rent debts are called in.
All right, that's everybody. Thank you so much to everyone that's here. We decided to do this at our last meeting, and so I had a week to plan this. And basically, I think you all found out about this in like the last few days, like 3 days. So thank you all for coming in with such short notice and hanging in there with kind of just all my last minute scrambling to do stuff. So I appreciate it. And with that said, I forgot to introduce really properly myself. I'm Nathan again. I'm trying to facilitate this whole thing. So I will be, talking here and there, but mostly just trying to I don't know, not say too much, I guess. Dom, squeaky chair. Yeah, I can definitely hear it. It's not too bad. So yeah, without further ado, I'll say I'm also a chair of the organizing committee. I am the chair of the direct tenant organizing working group. And so our working group, we go out and we actually will go to tenant unions and help them help assist them getting their union started or with any problems that they might have along the way. So yeah, and I got involved, I was actually involved in Bellingham, kind of by way of Whatcom County DSA in Bellingham with Bellingham Tenants Union. But then when I moved here, it was like a bunch of organizers basically pulled me in and started doing a lot of work with them, and it's really great. And I've been a renter my whole life. So these issues are very important to me and basically everyone I know. So yeah, it made a lot of sense. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about what we're here to talk about. And so the current situation is kind of complicated. So I thought it would be cool. I had Lior present some information. And so, yeah, take it away, Lior.
All right, thank you, Nathan. So I'm going to try to give a brief rundown of where we are right now policy-wise. If you were confused before about what was happening when things started and when things ended, you're not alone. There were 3 different pieces of legislation from the state level, the city level, and the county level, and all of them changed at kind of random times. So they were pretty difficult to keep up with. All of them were preventing evictions in some form, and all of them were set to end roughly at the end of this month. We have a slightly cleaner landscape moving forward because there is a bill that was passed at the special session just a few days ago. That's at the state level, and now the law is going to be the same throughout the state. And because it's legislation, not executive order, there's some more details that were included in there as well. So I'm not going to talk too much about what was happening before. I'm going to shift to where we're at right now and what kind of protection renters have. So this new bill that has the eviction moratorium clarifies that evictions are not allowed between April 1st, so retroactively, all the way to September 30th. That's the time in which evictions are not allowed. There's also a 6-month grace period lasting until March 31st of 2021 that people can use to pay back their rent debt. So if you didn't pay rent sometime between April 1st and September 30th, you have until March 31st to pay back that rent before a landlord could evict you for non-payment. In terms of the people who are covered under this new bill, it's any sort of non-payment. So if you don't pay rent, that's not a reason that a landlord can use to evict you. Also, no-cause evictions. So there are a number of different cases in which, even though most non-cause evictions were made illegal with a bill last year, there are still a few cases where people can receive a no-cause eviction. And right now, those evictions are illegal until September 30th. And then there's also something called a qualifying landlord cause that was created in the last set of legislation that passed a year and a half ago. And most qualifying landlord causes are banned. So qualifying landlord causes are, for example, if the landlord or if a landlord's family member wants to move in or the landlord wants to do major renovation, anything like that is not grounds for eviction until September 30th. They're not allowed to do it. So overall, that's pretty great. That's a pretty decent chunk of time where renters are protected from getting kicked out of their house for a whole variety of reasons. But now we need to talk about who's not covered. So first of all, there is one qualifying landlord cause that managed to get an exemption, and that is if a landlord sells their house to somebody and the person who purchased the house is intending to move into the house themselves. In that case, the tenant can get evicted. So it's pretty high stakes. In order to use that, the landlord needs to show that there's an agreement to purchase the house from somebody else. But it's still an exemption that would end up putting somebody on the streets in the middle of this pandemic. So certainly not something that we're excited about. And then also for-cause evictions are still allowed. So that means that if you break certain lease rules that are egregious enough that the landlord is allowed to enact an eviction for them, then that's the situation in which a landlord can still evict a person. And there are some certain situations in which that can be sticky, but one of the things that we're worried about with that is that landlords will abuse their power. One other important kind of wonky bit of information that's really important for people to know is that one of the few ways in which landlords are allowed to do no-cause evictions, usually not during pandemic times, is that they can implement them during the first year of someone's tenancy, whether they're on a fixed term lease that ends in less than a year or on a month-to-month. So right now they can't do that. They can't do those no-cause evictions, which is great. But if somebody's first year ends during this period, then the definition of first year extends until 30 days after the end of the emergency period. So essentially until the end of October, which means that if you thought your landlord was going to no-cause evict you and your first year is ending sometime around now, they might still be able to no-cause evict you sometime in October. So that's an important thing to watch out for. Another important bit of wonky detail is that if renters are going to make use of the 6-month grace period that they have in order to pay back their rent, they need to let the landlord know. The landlord needs to send them a message at the end of the, around September 30th, at the end of the emergency period when evictions are banned. And that message needs to tell them that the rent is due, that back rent is due, and those tenants need to let the landlord know within 14 days that they plan on making use of that grace period. If they don't do that, they can get penalized half a month's rent. So that's pretty shitty in my opinion, but it's part of the current law. So what are the things that we are most worried about within this current policy landscape? Short term, we're worried about people doing all sorts of for-cause evictions that are bullshit. So finding, like, sniffing around the house, trying to find tenants doing any sort of small lease violations, and then racking those up to be able to use those as a reason to enact a for-cause eviction. That's something that we've already heard about people doing, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen. The other big issue can be harassment, and this can be in the form of sending tenants emails or phone calls every single day. In other places, we've seen landlords that remove tenants' doors or take away their appliances, or do all sorts of really egregious things to try to force the tenants to leave. Some of these things are clearly illegal. Some of these things are kind of in a gray area of whether they're illegal, but we've already seen an uptick of this, and as the pressure continues to grow as this eviction moratorium goes on, we imagine that that pressure will continue. And then misinformation. There have already been cases popping up where landlords are telling tenants, you need to leave by such and such a date. And it turns out that there's kind of a legal gray area where if a landlord says you need to leave but doesn't actually file an eviction movement in court, that doesn't count as an eviction. They're allowed to essentially lie to their tenants in that way. Or even if they're technically not allowed to, the tenant's defense against that is pretty minimal. So doing massive education so that tenants don't fall for these landlord lies is going to be really important. Long term, what we're worried about is that some people are probably still not going to have a job come September 30th. Some people might have a job, but might have accrued massive debt, not even just their rent debt, just in general massive debt for all sorts of other things because they've been laid off during this time. And so when it comes time to pay rent for October, they're not going to have that money, and we're likely to see a wave of evictions then. And then for other people who are like going to able to find a way to still pay rent during that time because they will have gotten their job, they might be thousands of dollars in debt with back rent debt. And if we don't figure out a way to do rent forgiveness or some sort of assistance that helps those people dig themselves out of those holes, come March 31st, 2021, which yes, feels like a long time from now, but we need to start getting ready because we're probably going to see a massive wave of evictions at that time. So those are sort of some of the things that we are trying to look out for and trying to think about how to deal with them and how to support tenants as they're trying to deal with them. We have lots of ideas for types of solutions that we can enact, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today is some of the policy ideas and some of the direct action ideas that we have that we've seen being used around the country and around the world in order to try to address these sorts of issues.
Thank you, Leora. That was a lot of information. Thank you so much for compiling all of that. I just wanted, I had a few questions. I was like, so like basically the only way someone could get evicted right now would be if there was a landlord that was trying to sell their property and they actually had a piece of paper that said that someone was going to buy it, and then they could get them out that way. Is that right? Is that the only way that an eviction basically could actually happen?
That or a for-cause eviction. So if a tenant breaks certain lease laws.
Right.
I don't think it has, I don't know all of the details about for-cause evictions. There are some that aren't just 24-hour notices, but anything where there is enough or specific lease law violations that allow a landlord to evict a tenant for those violations are still intact. There's no protection if the reason for the eviction is the tenant's behavior.
Okay. And then at the end of the period where we are going to end from the moratorium, but then enter into the, we still have rent. Basically, you can say you're not going to pay rent until March 31st. And that there's that thing about where renters have to affirmatively like confirm to their landlord that they're going to be using it. And that's only 14 days that they have until, is that from when the moratorium's up or after their landlord like gives them that notice or whatever, right? I was confused about that.
Yeah, so just to clarify one thing, people can't get evicted for not paying rent between April and the end of September. Unless there's new legislation, come October, they will be required to pay rent, or they can be evicted for not paying rent for October. The grace period is to pay the back rent that was due before the end of September. And yeah, it's 14 days. There's a very explicit language in what kind of notice the landlord has to send to the tenants in order to like claim the rent at the end of the moratorium. But so when they send that notice, the tenants have 14 days from when that notice arrives to let the landlord know that they are going to make use of the grace period. And the notice needs to say that they have 14 days. But if it takes them a while to open it, if they don't read it, and they were planning on using that grace period, then they can get charged half a month's rent as a penalty for that.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. Anyone else have any questions or clarifying comments or? Yeah.
Question. Lior, do you know if there's a way that the tenant has to notify their landlord that they're going to use that option? Do they have to notify them in writing, or is that preferred? Probably, right?
I mean, that would be preferred for the tenant, right? Because they have a record of it. It says that they can send them a paper copy, or that electronic notification is also fine. So I think any sort of written record that they contacted the landlord should qualify.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot to go through. So if there's any viewers right now that have any questions, we are looking at questions in the comments below the video. So we'll pick those up, and we can get to them throughout the presentation, or we'll get to them at the end if we don't see them in time. But yeah, so that's pretty good, I think, for that section. Thanks, Lior. And so I think like the main thing is, we don't have to worry, thankfully, about evictions right away, but it's on the horizon. And so we're gonna, like, the current situation is landlords are gonna be looking for ways to harass people, especially if they don't want them in their building anymore, because that's what evictions were for, was to get rid of unruly or unwanted tenants for whatever reason. So we've been, like, even before, during the initial phase of the quarantine, we were receiving a lot of complaints, or it seemed like we had more than normal complaints of harassment from landlords. Ali, do you know of any of that? Has there been a higher than normal amount of complaints about landlords harassing them? I think I've personally seen that, from people that I know. But since you're monitoring those incoming things, what have you really been seeing so far?
Yeah, what I've seen is definitely an increase in, really a variety of harassment, primarily around obviously repaying rent or around rent payments. Landlords really putting a lot of pressure on tenants to make payment plans, which under the they have no obligation to do, and just hounding them, multiple, just contacting them constantly, asking what's the status update on that. Another way is the landlords, kind of the small mom and pop landlords, are moving, threatening kind of to move back in. We have one situation where a landlord actually moved into a spare bedroom of a house where tenants are on individual leases, so there's actually nothing they can do about that. It actually severely affects their rights, because they now live in an owner-occupied property, have way less tenants' rights because of that. And landlords parking vehicles, taking up storage space and properties that the tenants had access to, taking up parking spaces with their own with the landlord's property. There's really been a variety of levels. It's really unsurprising, but still really distressing to see, I think.
Yeah, and so there's just like nothing really that they're, anything that they can think of pretty much. We've seen a lot of things, and I mean, like, this has happened before the pandemic, but like we said, it's been picking up, and I think even now we should probably expect it even more, because you can expect that these property owners are going to be nervous, looking for that income that they're missing, so they're going to put the squeeze down, and so we can expect those probably to get even more egregious, which is, I think, why before we needed this, but especially now, we should talk about harassment and protections from harassment. And so wanted to talk a little bit about our policies at PTU that we've been trying to develop or think about ways that we can enact some kind of legislation to protect tenants from this type of harassment. And Lauren, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
So PTU has been developing a tenant, we call it the Tenant Protection Ordinance, but it's modeled off of a similar ordinance that several other cities in California have, like West Hollywood, Santa Monica, Berkeley. So it has kind of a number of generic things that you find on all of these other cities' ordinances. And this is something that we had been developing pre-COVID. So we don't have, I think we should actually add a few things that pertain to what Nathan was just talking about and what Ali was talking about with repeatedly asking for when the rent will be available. The things we have now are structured around bullying. So, verbal abuse, physically harming a resident, that's pretty obviously egregious, damaging a resident's property, etc. Misinformation. So perhaps, I mean, this is sort of in the realm of some of these COVID issues, but communications that suggest a tenant is required to leave the unit when they're not legally required to do so. I have read quite a few stories on PDX Renters Unite actually about this exact thing happening. So I think that this ordinance would already be helpful just with that language in place. So it's kind of the same thing as threatening evictions when there are no legal grounds for eviction. So I think if we were to add repeatedly asking for payment. Another thing is rules and treatment. So making new rules for which a landlord cannot establish a legitimate non-discriminatory reason. That's something that I've also heard of a lot. So yeah, kind of things like putting things on the porch or balcony, things that were never enforced until all of a sudden for one tenant or for all the tenants, even if the landlord is trying to get a bunch of people to leave. And so I'm not going to go into too much more detail about that, but I will put a link in the chat and then everyone can kind of read more details about that. So we are currently collecting stories to support our advocacy around this policy. And then so if you'll go to that link, you can see, I'll just put both links in, but there's a Google form to share your story. It's really, really crucial that policymakers see concrete examples of these things happening. Otherwise, it just is abstract. It just sounds like someone's stressed out, they're having a hard time, but what does that actually look like on the ground? So we really need to let them know what it does look like. And along those same lines, emailing the city council and the mayor and demanding this is extremely helpful. We do need it on a state level, but we feel like it's going to be easier to achieve at the city level first. And then ideally we can scale it up at some point to the state because we know that there are obviously a lot of Oregonians who do not live in Portland or in Multnomah County. Also, I've seen a lot of people say that their landlord said that they can't pay their bills without rent, which I'm sure is true of some bills, but just FYI, and I'll also put this link in the chat. There's a bill that was passed at the same time that the moratorium extension was passed, and that is House Bill 4204. So I'm just going to read this from OPB's website. So a companion of sorts to the eviction bill, this bill prohibits lenders from pursuing foreclosures against homeowners and other borrowers through September 30th. Governor Kate Brown has the authority to extend the moratorium past that date. Missed payments will be due at the end of the borrower's loan term. Great, they don't have to pay it back for maybe decades if some other arrangement is not made with the lender. So you can also tell your landlord, hey, you're cool with your mortgage.
That is kind of mind-blowing that they don't have to pay it back until
the very end. Yeah.
That's
So just good to know. And also just some other words about harassment. We say this a lot to people, but it can't be said enough. Document everything in every way that you can possibly think to do. You're not allowed to make an audio recording of someone without their consent, but you can save every single text, every single email. You can ask if you can video them when they come onto the premises. That can be really helpful also for discouraging harassment behavior. And another thing, when I have people kind of ask about, well, they keep texting me, they keep calling me, you have the right to ask them not to text you. That's reasonable. You can say, I would like you to communicate with me through email unless it's an emergency. So that's something that you can do to kind of take control of the situation. It's a very reasonable request. And if they keep asking you to pay, you just continue to inform them of your legal rights. I know it's a really, really stressful situation, but the law is on your side in this particular situation. So yeah, I'll put those links in the chat in a moment.
great. Looks like we had a question pop up, so we're still pretty good on time. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this. Let's see. The question is, I've been doing my best to keep our communication via email or text and reiterate what she said verbally as a sort of documentation, but how do I protect myself? All right. What do you say?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it kind of goes back to what I was saying is, you have the right to ask that your communications be written. They can't force you to speak with them on the phone unless it's like an emergency, and there's no other way for you to communicate effectively through email. Next time they call you on the phone, perhaps don't answer the phone, send an email and say, I'd like to keep the communication in email. I realize that it's really uncomfortable to argue with your landlord when there's a power differential, for sure, but there's no reason that you have to talk to them on the phone, again, unless it's an emergency. So it just requires, I think, being firm about it, which I know is hard.
Mm-hmm. All right. And we can get that OPB, the link to that document on the page. Maybe I'll have.
And it's also this tab.
Oh, this one. Okay. So we're going to get those links to what we were talking about in terms of the law that we were reading from OPB put up so that you can take a look at that. It's pretty interesting. All right. Let's see. Before we get too much further, I was just wondering, why didn't you say before that the landlord or like the lobbyists in like California have already like tried to sue the city or whatever?
The Greater Los Angeles Apartment Owners Association, which is a real ghoulish group of individuals, is suing the state, I believe, or maybe it's the city of San Francisco for extending an eviction moratorium. Yes.
Okay. Do you think that would happen here?
Possibly.
Maybe. Okay.
It's quite possible.
I just like seeing that when they go so far as to sue the city over over like it seems like.
Well, they were suing the city over fare.
Right, they were. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like I wouldn't be surprised to see them out there. Any other comments or ideas on this issue of retaliation and harassment?
I could use this as a transition into my next section if you want, because while Lior was speaking, I also thought about the possibility using for-cause evictions other than non-payment of rent to harass tenants, and it may not be because they think they actually can evict the tenant on like the legal grounds of whatever the violation is. There's too many plants on the porch or something that's violating a lease. But it could be, again, to intimidate tenants, to make them move out prematurely because they think they have to. So this is, again, to just emphasize, we need to take this moment to, educate our neighbors and ourselves, whenever we can, like talk to each other about our renting situations And to go into what eviction defense will look like, I'll just give a little overview of how we've done it in the past, and just some ideas like for us to prepare like strategy and organizing in the court or wherever the evictions take place, because it may end up being e-evictions, which would be really hard to defend against, but we need to prepare for that in the meantime. So whenever we've shown up to eviction court, it's usually because a tenant has contacted PTU, whether through email, Facebook, Twitter, and we've talked with the tenant about their situation. And like most evictions, they're for non-payment of rent. And in most cases, those evictions aren't just handled by tenants agreeing to pay the rent they owe. They sign something called a stipulated agreement, which is like a schedule of payments to pay back whatever amount they owed when the landlord files for eviction. So when we show up, they've already gotten their eviction notice and they have a court date. So we show up to essentially help them negotiate with the attorney, because that's always how it goes. The attorney has 10, or more clients, or just people they're evicting, not clients, like landlords. They could represent more than one landlord at a time, but often they're they have a lot of cases they do. So there's a line that happens outside of the courtroom, the eviction courtroom, and it's line of tenants waiting to talk to whatever lawyer has been hired to evict them, or to give them an agreement to sign. And most of the time, what it looks like is we just help tenants feel comfortable to ask as many questions and assert different things in their agreement, or refuse certain schedules, like I won't have the money to pay this. And in stipulated agreements, if you violate the scheduled payment, that results in like an expedited eviction. So just now taking that, we show up, whatever we're contacted. What may need to happen in the future, because there will be so many evictions filed and being processed, is having, whether it's a team of people or a rotating group of people that are at least, knowledgeable enough to give tenants moral support, because none of us are attorneys when we show up. We're not showing up in, a legal capacity. We're just there in solidarity as tenants who, know our rights and can help other tenants assert them. So part of like how we could prepare for this is information gathering. We need to find out who has owed rent and begin to connect them to each other. Like Lauren has referred to PX Tenants Unite, and that's a great resource for us, where we have thousands of tenants that talk about their issues. And we could put out a poll and find out, who owes back rent by the time the eviction moratorium comes to end, and organize basically just to figure out when we have to show for this person, or who do we tell what information. But to scale it up is the next issue. And I'm just going to open up the discussion here, because I think we need new ideas on how we're going to respond to the eviction crisis, and how we're going to counter rent debt. I was talking with Margot earlier, and one idea that we could do as a part of like preparing the education is tenants who owe back rent right now, they should start doing a habitability look through their home. If they've got things that are broken, that are required to be kept in order by law, those are things that can be essentially put up against the cost of the rent. So say someone's got like a window that's been broken for half a year, whatever, it leaks water, and they've let their landlord know about it. When it comes to the eviction proceedings, that's one way to help basically take the cost down of what's owed in rent. So that's one way to help prepare for this, and to help basically like gunk up the system, because we are going to want to figure out the way to draw out evictions as much as possible, because that's one way to negotiate with a little bit more leverage, because it's not. You want to jump in there?
Right. Well, I was just going to clarify habitability. I can't say it. Those issues are like things like you have like huge holes in your wall or something, but they could also be like small things like some heat, or there's like problems with your heating, or you have mold or something, or there's pipe issues. I can imagine there's a lot of different things that would count towards that, right?
And I'll post the ORS, the statute that refers to all the things in the chat here.
That would be quite helpful. I was just
Chapter 90.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so again, ideas for how we can show up and defend. You know, whether it is going to be again in like Multnomah County Court, that is an open question, and we'll just have to keep our ear to the ground to figure out what it's going to look like, because I can't find the link to the story. I've seen examples of like evictions not be done in courthouses, but in like open air places to social distance, but they pack people in to process quicker. And I'm not saying that is going to happen here, but it's a possibility, and that's one contingent we have to prepare for. And I see, I'm just looking at the agenda here. So we have what eviction court looks like, and then negotiating. And negotiating is what I'm talking about the entire time. Where most evictions don't get argued to the end where a judge makes a decision. Most evictions are settled way before that, and it's between the tenant and most often the landlord's attorney. So if we could organize so that tenants are not giving ground, like the tenants are holding the line, this is how we could end up with better outcomes. But we're not going to win in court. We're not going to negotiate all the rent that way. It's going to require some sort of concerted political organizing, but this is one element of it. And that's the ideas I'm looking for. Like I've talked in the past to people about trying to convince clergy to come to eviction court and make it like a media event, but we gotta brainstorm and figure out.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we just need people there, not just if it gets to the point of going to court, that's already pretty seriously far along in the process. And I think like if we do future live streams like this, I think it would be cool to do some education and training on that process, exactly what it looks like. I don't think we'll have time or resources right now to go over it, but it sounds like once you actually get to the courtroom, like that's pretty far along in the process. And like the important thing is like just like moral support a lot of the time is, and also like helping the tenant themselves feel like they have support, that they encouraging them to show up to court.
In one way too is organizing a union so that if it's a building of people who are going to get eviction notices, they can prepare that way, collectively, and not have to wait. And we won't have to wait until they're in the courthouse with us to meet them for the first time, for example. Like, right. And that's another. We just need to find out where there are buildings of people like that and talk to them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good idea that in the coming months, we have quite a while now. Well, until September, I guess, but even longer than that for all kinds of evictions, right? And until March. But it would be a good idea to get somehow get a group of people that know what eviction court is and what it's like, and how best to help a tenant and go. So people that are trained and understand what's at stake and what they're doing, to be able to go in and be an effective group that can help tenants out. It makes sense that if we have like a little list of people we can call, then we can get people out, potentially if there is a call. We're not going to just show up to any tenant. We're going to make sure that the tenant is informed and they're wanting people to be there. We're not just going to storm them and cause a scene or anything. But I think it would be a really great resource, like you're saying, to have people ready to go to court, and be there, be supporting, be willing to help them negotiate if it's possible. But so I'm excited. I think like that's something that we should work on, especially in my working group for direct tenants organizing. I'm excited. I want to talk to people about court support or eviction defense in other ways. And so if any of you listening out there are interested, definitely hit me up. On the Portland Tenants United website, we have contact, and the email for me is DTO, Direct Tenants Organizing. So use that email and then you can get through to me. So yeah, I'm excited to possibly get a whole bunch of people on the same page and surprising a few landlords at eviction court. That would be fun. All right. Any other questions for Dom or for anybody here around, or just like?
I'm reading the question by and trying to find the law that goes to your question. So it may just take me a moment.
Oh, we have a question currently that we're researching. I love it. It's great. That being said, also, if you have any other questions, definitely, and we don't get to it in this session, you can definitely send us an email or hit up our Facebook Messenger, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. That is one of the things we do. Also, if you're interested in organizing your building and getting or fighting for tenants' rights in any way, definitely hit us up about that, because we're always looking for people that are excited to do the work that we're doing and join us. And you can join PTU. Anybody can do that. That's always a good thing. So yeah, how are we doing on this question we got?
Nathan, I want to jump in real quick and answer another question here that's about whether people should be waiting for an announcement from Governor Brown in order to communicate with their landlords. And there's mention here of a rent forbearance form. And so I just want to be clear that legally you're not required to sign any forms right now. You are allowed to sign forms with your landlords in order to come to understandings. And those can be about clearly telling them that you are not going to pay rent during the eviction moratorium for certain periods of time. Those can be about creating payment plans, creating partial payment plans. You are allowed to sign any and all of those forms. You're not required to sign any of them. The only requirement that you have is if at the end of the moratorium, so after September 30th, your landlord sends you a notice that says that you are sends you a notice that says that you need to pay back the back rent and you want to use the 6-month grace period, within 14 days you need to tell them that. But you don't have to fill out any specific forms that they send you. And it is required for them to tell you that those forms are voluntary from now on. I want to mention that I'm not a lawyer, and so I'm not saying this is legal advice, but this is from reading the legislation. It's my understanding that you're not required to sign any forms. So just understand that. And once you know that, you are welcome to negotiate with your landlord to your heart's content, or not, if that's what you would rather do. But also, I don't think that the bill has been signed by Governor Brown at this point, but also it is very, very clear that it will be signed. So you can move forward in whatever sort of plans you're making as if that is law.
Thanks, Leor. Thanks. We have any other questions here? I can't, it's hard for me to.
So I also found the law.
Yeah.
So if Mona, if you're listening, Chapter 90, ORS 90.322, Section 2, so the landlord can't abuse their right to, access to their home to harass a tenant. So that's the law that you have to, if you want to correspond with your landlord to tell them, don't come and bully me. you can cite that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in Oregon, the governor doesn't have to sign bills for them to become law. It's like a kind of ceremonial thing / it can make them go into effect sooner. But these were signed with or were passed with emergency clauses. So her signing it is not going to expedite them going into effect. That being said, I don't know what it says in the bill about when they go into effect. I would assume immediately.
Yeah, it's upon passage.
So yeah, they're passed then. They don't have to be signed.
All right, thanks for that. Interesting. Interesting how that works. Cool. Let's see. So yeah, just one last thing is, if you have any, like I said, reiterating, if you have any questions or you're in, if you're in any trouble at all, give us a call or hit us up. We also have, it looks like, an attorney here who says they will give anyone with an eviction date a free consultation. His name's David Lawrence. The number is 503-295-3651. And we'll post that on our webpage or in the chat probably. And so thank you very much, David. That's great news. And thanks for your help. That is awesome. All right, we are coming up close to an hour. So I want to wrap up. Anything else you guys think of or want to talk about?
Well, we didn't really touch on the future trainings that we could have. I mean, based on interest from tonight.
Yeah.
And again, that would ideally be, you talk to your neighbors or invite your neighbors to this know your rights and, tenant organizing strategy for eviction in the future. And we'll just wait for responses and follow up from there.
I just wanted to add, I haven't personally heard about this happening in Portland, but I know in Los Angeles there's been a large number of illegal evictions where tenants unions have actually had to come in and physically, create a barrier or create community support for those tenants. So if you are in that position, first contact a lawyer, but also contact us, because if it's like a situation where things are literally getting thrown out on the street and you don't feel comfortable calling the police for obvious reasons, that's what a tenant union is for. So
yeah, there have definitely been a lot of unlawful no-cause evictions given for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. And to reiterate, that is illegal. You can't do that. They are actually breaking the law by giving out evictions during this time, no-cause evictions. So yeah, they can't do that.
I remember with the original emergency moratorium, there were ostensibly, fines in prison, like penalties for landlords that violate the moratorium. Is that still part of it, Lior? Or?
Oh yeah.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Well, Kate Brown's original order had you can be arrested if you violate the moratorium, if a landlord does.
It was criminal. No, it's the penalties now for violating it is, I believe, 3 months rent. It's no longer a misdemeanor.
Okay.
Yeah. There might be some other financial impacts, but I think that for the most part, it's a penalty of 3 months rent.
And so that actually goes right into what I was saying earlier, different strategies for, using the laws to peg down rent debt. Because if the landlord is harassing a tenant every month, and if that, is documented, it could be used to help the tenant. maybe even recover right at the end of it if they violated it enough times.
That's a good point. So you're saying like if a landlord is continually violating this, I mean, tenants could get money back to help pay all of this debt that they're accruing and stuff. Yeah, that makes sense. But so that just I think to reiterate like the importance of documenting and keeping track of all of the various things that your landlord might try or do, whether or not you think it actually is important. Just write it down or document it however you can, because it might come up later and it could be invaluable. So just remember that like it might be some pointless thing like landlord continually calling you, you should write down the times that they called or, have a log of that somehow. I'm sure that you'd probably be able to get that log of calls, but, things like that you'd want to be able to keep track of and go back to easily.
Screenshot it.
Screenshot
the building. Talk to your about it.
Sorry, say that again, Don. I didn't quite hear.
Oh, if you're in a building, make sure you talk to your neighbors about it because it's probably happening to them too.
Right. Yeah, definitely talk to your neighbors. If you suspect, well, if anything's happening to you, just, complain to them. Sometimes you don't know what they're going through either. They could be going through something even worse. And so they would have even more of a reason to want to collaborate, on these issues.
So just responding to Mona again. I would argue, that inspections right now is a really easy form of harassment because we're in a pandemic still. Unless they already have yearly inspections and this happens to be the time when they do it, why do they need to inspect all of a sudden? I also think that would be you could make a good argument that that's harassment and no, you can't inspect for, no reason. Right.
Actually, I know a few people who their landlord is continually trying to enter to do inspections because they want to evaluate it for like price, even though they have no real plans of selling it. Like they haven't at least informed them of it, but they just want to come and inspect it. And it's just so weird. Like we don't know why they want to come inspect all the time. So it's very suspicious. You definitely. I think it is definitely can be construed as a bullying tactic after a certain number of attempts. So that's a good thing to keep track of. And hopefully there's emails that you can refer to, and it's not all just phone calls, of course. So, all right, another question. So there's a window blocked by the building's trash and recycling, and they've complained a lot. Safety and fire hazard. What should I do? So safety and fire hazard, fire hazard, you can report that to fire, the code inspector. The fire code, the chief. Yeah.
Not the chief.
Not the chief.
The code inspector.
Right. Okay. Fire code inspector. Fire code inspector will be a very good person to talk to.
Yeah. There's.
Go ahead, Lauren. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, sorry. There are citywide building codes. I'll find that link that they should talk about fire, emergency access and everything, and egress out of windows. So that's something that you could send to them, and I'll find that in a moment.
Yeah, it would be a emergency violation of egress. So they would be not within the legal code, fire code, and the city can get them to change that almost immediately, probably.
And just generally, Mona, like a suggestion for your situation is, with all these things you brought up, create some sort of demand letter for your landlord to, tell them respect my rights, and here they are, write out the ORSs or the building code. You don't need to apologize. We like getting questions that give us something to talk about.
That's right.
But there are like form letters online, not forms so much, but examples of what a demand letter for like repairs or safety issues. I think it's on Portland Law Help, which is the legal aid website.
It's Oregon Law Help.
Oregon Law Help. Thank you. And so that is the general first step, is writing out communication that is clear. I know my rights, stop violating them, X, Y, or Z. I need fixed, or stop showing up to my house. But then is when you are going to want to, if it goes further past that, the landlord continues to harass and show up and all the different things, then you're going to want to come back and talk to us again. And possibly, if you can talk to neighbors, if you live in a building, if you're in a single family house, if you can find out the other people with your property management company and see if you can just gather more information and have some solidarity there. But first step is a demand letter. And you've got some great stuff to write it on right now.
Thanks, Dom. We have this question popping up. That's a good question. That's probably something housing lawyer, you would want to ask a lawyer about that.
A question about the PG&E bill, or I'm not sure if I didn't see the whole thing.
So
to switch it into this person's name, is that the question?
I think so.
Well, can you call the company and tell them that you no longer live there? I'm not quite.
Yeah.
They'll follow you after you move out. But for how long it takes the landlord to take over the unit, I don't have a straight answer on that.
We can ask some lawyers, and we can post that maybe on our page later, or do some research, because that's a good question. I don't think any of us knows that.
Is the question, when does the sheriff come to lock out the tenant? Is that the question, maybe?
Oh yeah, maybe.
Is it eviction? Is that what he's referring to?
Yeah, it's after an eviction.
From the renter pact. Did you move out voluntarily, or is this an eviction situation? That's our question.
I think the original question said eviction.
Oh, it did? Oh, I missed that part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it just depends on what kind of eviction, whether it's for cause, the 24-hour, there's a couple different for cause versions of eviction. There's non-payment, the most common, which is not allowed right now. And then the dangerous person eviction, which is really quick. And then the other ones slip my mind how long it takes for a lease violation. But that's all if you want to read about it on ORS Chapter 90. If you just look up for cause eviction, or not Chapter 90, sorry. I'll find the link and put it in the chat.
All right. Well, yeah, that was a good question. We'll get back to that, and I think we'll have an answer. Maybe not during this live stream, but we'll put it up on our page or in PDX Renters Unite, the group there. So yeah, thanks everyone for all of your questions. It's been really great to interact a little bit with you all who are watching. So yeah, I'm gonna. Here we have one more. We'll make this the last question. We have passed the hour mark, so I don't want to go too long. Is anyone reading this? There's a lot to see. Let me read it out loud. Hey there, we received a 72-hour termination of our lease on April 8th. I let my landlord know we were laid off on March 17th and let them know we would pay when we had some sort of income, and they told us we still had to pay on time.
No. That's an easy one.
No. Just say no.
Yeah, and you can send them the links that we provided. There's the Oregonian one that has the whole rundown of everything, and I'm going to put now a link to the renter eviction moratorium versus the foreclosure moratorium. So you can always send that.
You're welcome, Mona. Anytime. All right. I got a rent increase of $155 a month. I'm going to fight it in the meantime. Do I pay what I have been or the increase? I received no notice of an increase, just a bill informing I owe 2 months back from increased amount. Wow.
It's an illegal. Rent.
Yeah. Not a lawyer, can't give legal advice, but if you didn't get a valid 90-day notice of a rent increase, then you're under no obligation to pay. I would call legal aid, call a lawyer ASAP.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing to remember is that to increase it, they need to give you 90 days. So since they didn't do it properly, that starts all over again. So they can't say, well, okay, it's now fine. Let's say 30 days from now. No, got to start all over and they have to do it right.
Yeah. And that was a good reminder, Allie. None of us are actually lawyers. So these are recommendations. We're not saying that this is your legal advice. We can't legally give you legal advice.
We say it every 5 minutes, so I'm not a lawyer, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Advice.
All rent increases in the state of Oregon are required to be given a 90 days notice. And in the year 2020, you can't get a rent increase of more than 9.9%. So I'd be pretty surprised if 155, unless you're living in a house or something, if that's not more than 10%. So
Yeah.
it might be double illegal.
Mm-hmm. Or
and if you live in Portland, then you can request relocation as well. So
relocation assistance. And correct me if I'm wrong, but now because of currently, if you're in your first year of tenancy and month-to-month lease, is that correct? You
yes,
cannot receive a rent increase within
that's
your
correct.
first year.
No rent increases in the first year of tenancy. Obviously, no rent increases if you're on a fixed term lease either, of any length.
Okay.
And if you need help down the line, like responding to this, you can just message us on Facebook or Twitter, whatever. We can help you out with that. If you need
Dom's plugging the Twitter. I'll plug the Facebook. You know who answers which one. If you want to talk to Dom, message us on Twitter. If you want to talk to me, message us on Facebook.
And especially if you're living in an apartment complex or in some other place where you know other people that your landlord, who are tenants of your landlord, and you have any interest in organizing with them to address these issues, then the best thing you can do is to email Nathan, and because he's the chair of the Direct Tenant Organizing Committee. And you can do that at dto@pdxtu.org. I'm going to put that in the chat here for a minute. That's again, dto@pdxtu.org. And we can try to talk to you to give you ideas and lend you support in organizing with other tenants, because that's how you're going to be able to get the most power.
I'm just going to add one more thing about that. We're also advocating for a rent freeze, and we're advocating for it to be retroactive to the beginning of the pandemic. So while it may feel like it's not helpful, I would strongly urge you to email Kate Brown and your representatives and share that story of what a huge financial burden that is for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I can't remember the name of the person whose question just popped up there. T, thank you. T, I definitely recommend calling Call to Safety, formerly the Portland Women's Crisis Line. That number is 503-235-5333. Maybe someone who has access to it can put it in the chat. And they actually have access to a lot of different information. But that's a really good starting point, because they're really kind of the center hub for getting you connected to a variety of resources to make sure that you're able to get into a safe environment as soon as possible.
Yeah. All right. We're gonna take 2 more minutes, and if there's one more question, we'll take that. But otherwise, I want to wrap it up because we are a little bit past. There's that number that Allie was talking about for the I believe it's the abuse hotline number. Is that
Call to Safety? Yep. It used to be called the Women's Crisis Line.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Cool. But yeah, I just want to again thank everyone for being here and taking the time to discuss these things and answer some questions. And we'll be talking again soon about all of this, probably at our next meeting. And so yeah, any last comments or ideas or suggestions? Okay, well, we're going to make this the last question. and then we will definitely wrap up. So what happens if the owner of the property cannot pay for maintenance of the property due to not receiving any rent?
I got a quick answer for that. Ask your landlord if you can spend money to do it and knock it off your rent. And if you have like a rent debt, say, you know, if I spend some money repairing this, take that off my rent debt.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Just negotiate, see if you can negotiate it. If you're able to, you know, do that work.
If they legitimately can't afford it, I'm immediately skeptical of their claim that they can't afford it.
Mhm.
If they can't afford it, then they should get a job, would be my suggestion. Being a landlord is not a job.
I think another just important thing on that is from a legal perspective, they are required to fix it and they're required to figure out how to fix it. You are not required to pay rent. That is the law right now. And so you can say, I'm so sorry, that sounds really hard. I really hope you figure it out and I'm rooting for you. But fix where I live because that's your responsibility.
Call him Pop. They really like that.
Yeah.
And what you do to is you know, withhold a certain amount of rent every month until it's fixed, and say you're not going to get any more rent until it's fixed, and that could also be a solution. But message us if you want to talk about strategizing that.
Yeah, put it on a credit card. Tell them that.
If you're like Dom said, I mean, if you're handy, I'm handy. You know, I enjoy doing little things. If that's the kind of thing you're into, then by all means, you know, you can work out that situation. You're also allowed, can be paid a fair hourly wage as well on top of the cost of materials. But ultimately, like Lior said, they're legally required to make those necessary repairs.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, that's our last question. Any closing remarks from anybody?
Together we can control the rent.
Yeah.
Join PTU if you're not a member. You know, we're up against a huge behemoth that is the landlord lobby, right? Big advocacy groups like Multifamily Northwest have millions and millions of dollars. We saw just now in this session, they were able to get this carve out. You know, them, the Oregon Realtors Association, you know, we're up against, you know, a lot financially, and, you know, joining PTU, becoming a dues paying member, we're able to pool our resources and really have a fighting chance to actually, you know, make a material difference in the lives of renters, not only in Portland, but statewide. You know, as we saw, a lot of these, you know, improvements are directly related to the advocacy that PTU members have done over the years. And the more people that join, the more we're able to do.
You turned into a robot at the end there, Allie.
Dang it.
I understood most of it. That's okay.
Sorry.
No, it was kind of cool, actually.
Well, join PTU, long story short.
Did we talk about our proposed plan for the rent debt at all? Can you want to talk about that?
Oh, no.
So yeah, obviously that's a huge issue, is that even if someone can pay their rent later on and they've accrued thousands and thousands of dollars of debt, how are you going to pay for that? What we're advocating, since the state legislature approved, or this special committee approved $55 million in rental assistance a few weeks ago, is that money, instead of going to pay an entire rent for a tenant, that there'd be rent forgiveness for people who can't pay, so for the debt, and that instead there'd be a landlord-based program where they could apply for real expenses. So things that are tax deductible, like maintenance, you know, just basic upkeep, staff, mortgage, et cetera. So that's something we've been advocating for, and it'd be great if you could email Kate Brown and your reps about that as well.
Yeah, that's an important one because of, you know, people are going to be owing thousands by the end of this, and that's a disaster waiting to happen. Okay, well, I again want to thank everyone. I also want to thank our person behind the scenes doing a lot of technical support for us, David. You are doing great, and thank you so much for setting up this fancy live streaming deal. It worked out pretty well, I think. So we'll look into this another time. Again, if you have any questions, if you had a question that you wanted to ask that we didn't get to, hit up. Let's see if I can do this. Facebook, our messenger, Facebook Messenger, or Twitter over here. Hit up one of those with a question, and we'll get back to you. If you have a story about harassment or anything, you can put that on our page, and we're going to use that as leverage to get TPO, or Tenant Protection Ordinance, passed.
Add one thing. Also, if you have a story like a huge rent increase or harassment that you want to share with the media, get in touch with me, and I can try to connect you with someone who can help you share that story, because that is super powerful and really helpful. So it's Lauren E at pdxtu.org. I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah, that's great. And last but not least, if you are interested in organizing your building, or you really want to help us out, like in organizing at all, hit me up. We already said it earlier, but it's DTO. I can't remember the exact email, but it's pretty close to that. It's on our webpage, and we'll put it in the chat later. So
yeah, it's DTO at pdxtu.org.
I knew it was really easy, and I just
Delta Tango Oscar.
Yeah, right. Anyway, thank you all so much, and I will hit you all up again to do this sort of stuff, because I think I want to do this stuff more in the future. Because it's really fun. And one last thing, Lior, I like your t-shirt. So, yeah, good job. All right, with that, we're gonna say goodbye. So thanks. Yeah, we can.